Welcome to Literacy Mindset, where education leaders from across the country share strategies for improving K-12 instruction today and preparing for the challenges of tomorrow. The stakes are high. Students are facing new academic demands, and educators are navigating an ever-changing educational landscape. Each episode, we explore the most effective literacy initiatives, innovative tools, and strategies that are reshaping education. Whether you're an educator looking to improve student outcomes or passionate about driving meaningful change in schools, the Literacy Mindset brings you the insights and strategies you need to stay ahead. This is where education leadership meets real-world impact.
All right. Well, I'm really excited today for my guest, another episode on the Literacy Mindset. Ben Zulauf, Director of Literacy at Cicero School District 99 in Illinois. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Really been looking forward to this. We've been having some good conversations in preparation for what we might talk about on the podcast today. Why don't you start us off just a little bit by telling us your story, your journey, how it is that you got to where you're sitting today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, full transparency, this probably makes me maybe one of the less than ideal educators you've had on the podcast. I went to education not really, I did it because I wrestled most of my life and I wanted to stay connected to athletics in some way, shape, or form. So teaching is a direct avenue to coaching. And so I started as a fifth grade classroom teacher and coached at the high school there. It was a different district, but within the same community. That's the feeder district our kids went to. My second year of teaching, we had discussed a little bit how teachers aren't paid very well. So I wanted to get my grad school degree, nice little bump on the pay scale.
Okay.
Again, I'm very embarrassed to admit all of this now. But my assistant soup, I was lucky enough to have somebody who kind of cared at the district office and had a one-on-one meeting with me just saying, you want your resume to mean something. And so she pointed me to a different grad school program. I ended up getting a master's and doctor of education in literacy. And then from there, just kind of stumbled on to one thing after the next with the Reading League first. And within, I bought all their past presentations, learned a lot from them, kept seeing the letters brought up in there. So I was like, well, if I'm going to have a doctoral literacy, I should probably know what this letters thing is. So did that training. And then again, just kind of snowballed into other things, and where now literacy is kind of my go-to passion here.
It's your area of expertise. I love it. That's excellent. Both the formal side of things and then just a self-directed passion and discovering learning, which is more and more available today than it's ever been. So I love hearing that. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about Cicero. I don't know if there's a uniqueness to the number 99, but it's Cicero 99 in a suburb of Chicago. A couple other details maybe will help the audience.
Yeah, so Cicero is situated just outside of Chicago. We used to be, I thought, Cicero or Illinois has a ton of school districts at like 862 or something. So when I came to Cicero, what's that?
And they all have a number?
They all have a number.
Okay.
Some numbers are repeated. Don't quite understand that, but it's what it is. So I came to Cicero. I thought we were a huge school district. I come from a district of about 2,200 kids. When I started in Cicero, it was about 9,000 kids. So significantly larger. And then as I've branched out and worked with and collaborated with districts across the country, and I hear like, oh yeah, we're 37,000 kids. I'm like, we're not that big. So we're down to about 8,500 students now. Of those 8,500, I'd say we're high 90%, 97, 98% Hispanic. We're right around like 75% low income. We're looking at around 60% language learners, with Spanish being our primary language outside of English. And then we're just spread out across 14 different campuses, and we have pretty much everything there. We have a K2 building, a couple K3s, a couple K6, a couple 4-6, and then one junior high, which actually, fun fact, it's the largest, square footage wise, the largest junior high in the country, built to hold over 4,000 kids.
Wow.
It's a couple city blocks, 4 stories. My coaches are on the 4th floor, so it's always humbling getting up to my coach's office for my department meeting.
That is huge.
Yeah,
Oh my
it's
goodness.
a
Okay.
real big place.
All right. Good. Well, that helps orient us a little bit to where you're at. So you take over in this, director of literacy role about 4 years ago. Is that
Yeah,
right?
this is my fourth year. Yep.
Okay. So maybe walk us through. You get in the seat. It's all sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns when you get there. What are you looking at when you start?
It was perfect. We had zero room for improvements. No, it was we had a lot of good things in place.
Okay.
I started in 21, just after kids are coming back from the pandemic. When I started, we were at just under 10% proficiency at 9.9% according to our state tests.
Okay.
And we just had at my interview. It was interesting. Mary Isaac, one of our assistant superintendents, had said, we actually have our own internal reading wars, if you want to say, of people who really are strong on one side, believing in systematic and direct instruction, and people on the other side of more, discovery learning, or let's just get kids motivated and put them around books and they'll learn to read. So that's where we started. Let's unite these teachers who come at it from these philosophically different standpoints.
Got it. So would you say that was one of the biggest challenges that you faced, was just a divide of pedagogical thought process when you got here?
And that was a huge thing that we needed to address right away.
Okay.
We got too many people. If we're paddling too many different directions, we're not going to go anywhere. And so,
Right.
I shared it was day 2 when I had my budget meeting, and it was really productive. I knew exactly nothing of what I was supposed to do or discuss in that meeting. But one thing that we did come up was, we had set aside money. It was literacy's turn to do a curriculum adoption process. And I had just said, if we adopt a curriculum right now with knowledge where it's currently at, we're going to get more of the same. We really need to invest in our teachers. And I was lucky enough, Dr. Calderine, our superintendent, had said we invest in people, not products. And so I had his full support of, okay, if we're going to develop people, then let's be serious about it and let's develop people. And so that was a huge standpoint, because there was a lot of unlearning that needed to happen. I was familiar with the unlearning. I needed to do it myself in several of the areas, but unlearning something is significantly more challenging than learning something fresh.
Than learning it for the first time.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And so you actually did push out the adoption then, and you spent some time focusing on professional development and just structural learning.
Yeah. So I had completed my letters training prior to starting in the district. I'm not saying that's the perfect or the best training
Sure.
out there. It was just the one that I had done that
Right.
really kind of opened my eyes to some things that I still didn't know. And so I asked just for a small, sample. Can we get 10 people to go through this training to start learning, talking about it, so we have a familiar vocabulary? And that was approved. And then letters training at the time, they could have up to a 40-person cohort. And so it's like, well, can we fill that cohort and actually bring somebody in the train? And so I put out a survey, just who's interested in learning more about this. And we actually had enough people interested to fill 2 cohorts. So we had 80 people go through it that first year. Then later in the school year, I asked for more funds. Could we start a 3rd cohort? And we had over 130 people interested, so we started 3 more cohorts of it.
Wow.
Yeah, and at the same time, we expanded. We have a district literacy leadership team. I run the literacy subcommittee, and so we expanded that, got more teacher voice on. And so, we started with listening to a podcast from Margaret Goldberg. I asked everybody to listen to the podcast, and then she actually came and talked to us. We had another podcast we listened to from Natalie Wexler, and then she came and talked to us about the importance of knowledge building and sentence level writing instruction. And then, just continuing that process of read this resource, listen to this podcast, watch this webinar, and then we'll actually hear from the person within that video so we can ask clarifying questions. We put together a scope and sequence of podcasts that we wanted people to hear. created opportunities, if you want to come and join and have a synchronous discussion where it will be online at this time. If you don't want to join, but you still want to see what other people are saying, here's an asynchronous opportunity. If you aren't interested in any of that, that's totally fine too. Here's the podcast everybody else is listening to. That's great.
Right.
And then that same time, we started with the annual literacy symposium that we put on in Cicero. That first year, we had Natalie Wexler, Margaret Goldberg, Elsa Cardenas-Hagen, and Lillian Duran just coming in. What does structured literacy look like? What does knowledge building look like? What are the implications for multilingual learners? And so we had a lot of PD in various ways in that first year of just kind of opening people up to things that they may not know. So when it was time in that first spring to start the curriculum adoption process, we put the application out. We actually had 85 people apply. I had 0 time with teachers that first year because of our new math curriculum. So I was like, hey, I can backdoor my way into a bunch of hours of PD if we take everybody. And so we had the funds, so we took everybody and provided some PD on what literacy instruction should look like, what that looks like within a curriculum, how to use a curriculum evaluation rubric. We're really happy with the curriculum that we landed on about a year later.
That's excellent. And, showing that putting in the work and making sure that sometimes you can slow down to speed up is the effective strategy here. Okay. Being a district that has a lot of students that speak another language other than English, have you found, maybe walk us through some of the challenges that come with that as you think about literacy and English literacy in particular, but maybe also some of the benefits that might surface as you talk about multilingual learners?
So the biggest obstacle to overcome was just, there's a lot of organizations nationally that, science of reading is now a buzzword. It wasn't when we started. That would just come out and say science of reading is not good for multilingual learners. We have several prominent organizations. NCEL is probably the one that I get the most emails about. Just saying that, all science of reading advocates care about is phonics, which is not true whatsoever. But I can understand if that is your viewpoint of the science of reading movement, why we're concerned about the over-identification of multilingual learners within special education programs. So there was a lot of pushback there in terms of, we need more than phonics, and a lot of conversations needed to be had to be to say, listen, I agree. We need to have vocabulary instruction and this emphasis on language structures. And it's only through that emphasis on language structures that we can really start getting at the contrastive analysis, both at all the way down to the phoneme level of what's the same and different in English and Spanish, all to the sentence level, to how do those sentences translate across paragraphs, right? Or those ideas translate across paragraphs. We had some people who would flat out say, well, we're not advocating to teach Spanish authentically. And when I would ask, what does authentically mean, the answer that I would finally get was, well, it's not how it's taught in Mexico. So, okay, well, technically I was advocating to teach English differently than how most of America teaches it. So I guess we're not teaching English authentically either. So let's do them both together.
Yeah, let's roll with the unauthentic train here. Okay.
So it took a lot of, we brought in, Gabby Bell out of Madison, Wisconsin. She wrote her dissertation on, a science of reading framework for multilingual learners, and just, hearing her perspective, I think it was very powerful to bring her in. Claude Goldenberg is one of the most kindest men you're ever going to meet in your life. And he's given us so much of his time, just saying, here's what I know from research. Here's what holds true for multilingual learners. Here's where we still have some questions. And so just bringing in other people. I've already mentioned Elsa Cardenas-Hagen. I've mentioned Lillian Duran. Just looking for who can we bring in to really not just say, here's what I think based on vibes, but here's what the research says. And here's what we know from research.
Right. Okay. That's great.
You asked about benefits. The one cool thing that I would love to just shout from mountaintops In the practices that we have implemented, our Spanish literacy is actually improving at a faster rate than our English literacy. So we have a universal screener in both English and in Spanish. And I mean, we're up just about to 60% proficiency according to our universal screener across the district in Spanish. We're nowhere near that in English.
Right. Wow. Okay. That's excellent. Why, not why, where do you start, or how do you measure the success of the programs that you are implementing? How do you think about success metrics?
We don't know. We have to look at our screening data.
Okay.
That's the first place that I look. I think there's a lot of just generic comprehension assessments where students may have to log on and answer, 43 questions if we're being specific about a certain assessment, and then we're
Right.
given a score of here's where students are. But I mean, if we're being honest, when it comes to reading comprehension, there's a lot of things that influence it. I remember being a fifth grade teacher, just kind of thinking like, God, I hope Ben got a good night's sleep last night. I hope Ben being like, I hope you got breakfast this morning. I hope there's no disturbances at the house. So having a quality, a valid and reliable screener in place is really important to us. And so, especially when it aligns to the pillars that we have from the National Reading Panel, those are things that, like, if a student struggles with nonsense word fluency, I know how to teach phonics. If a student struggles with fluency, I know how to teach fluency. Like, this isn't I hope he slept last night. This is a direct reflection of my instruction, and I know things that I can do to explicitly help with these things. And so I don't want to say I'm teaching to the test, but there are pillars, right, of things that we need to focus on and make sure students are secure with. So looking at the screening data is, we've seen consistent growth since we've started this. That growth has translated into, for better or for worse, I think a lot of school districts are evaluated based on their state tests. And so we've gone from, like I said, about 9.9% proficiency to about 24-ish% proficiency. So just about a quarter of our kids there, which I understand 3 out of 4 kids still struggle to read proficiently, but to make almost triple the growth in 3 years.
Measure, right.
We'll take that. And I say 3 years because we really didn't touch literacy instruction in that first year.
Right.
So that's another great avenue. And then I'm actually the president of the Illinois Reading League. And so we had Stephanie Stoller on our webinar back in September. And so I had asked her flat out of, when we're changing initiatives, how do we know that it's working? Because, a student in 7th grade didn't necessarily have the first 6 or 7 years of instruction, right? And she said, you should look at your K1 scores, and if your literacy initiatives are successful, then you should see a double in the percentage of students who are proficient at K1 in your first year. And we definitely hit that in English, and we were really close to hitting that in Spanish.
Wow, that's excellent. Okay, let's talk about the adjacent side to the core literacy programs and initiatives, and that oftentimes is intervention when maybe skill gaps do form, and how we think about that. Just talk us through a little bit about the frameworks that you use, and maybe some of the systems in place or resources that you've deployed to try and help on an intervention standpoint.
So interventions is an interesting story for us, just because when I had started, we had started piloting 2 different intervention programs pre-pandemic. Okay. And when I started, the initial goal was we should pick those back up where we left off to see if there's any value with them. And so I started digging through those 2 resources. I had voiced multiple times, just I wouldn't use these resources. I wouldn't want these resources used with my children. These don't seem to really align with what we know from reading research. And finally, it was October of that year of like, okay, well, if not this, then we need to get something else. Right. The issue with that, we knew that we were going to start the curriculum adoption process in the spring. And so you can't take your intervention program prior to buying a tier 1 program. And so that left us in a bind of, okay, well, what are we going to use? And so my district literacy coaches and myself really sat down and took a look at, the things that we had learned from letters and built out an instructional framework, starting with foundational skills, because that was something that had been neglected within the district for several years. Built out a scope and sequence using materials that we had, created all the resources ourselves, and then we were able to provide that training for interventionists. We started with just diagnostic assessments. What is it? How do you use it? How do you interpret it and use it for instruction? And then had a series of PDs of, okay, so this is where students are. What do you do with it? What does that instruction look like? And providing PD about what practices to use, and then giving them time to actually practice those so that they go back and they can feel more confident with their students. And it was really fun that first year to hear interventionists later in the year just say, like, God, this is the first time we've had kids exit interventions. That's great. That's the goal. From there, we built out a fluency structure as well. And then we have a comprehension structure that really the comprehension side of things looks at more of syntactic awareness and just syntactical features to help kids make connections within and across sentences, which we know a lot of time our struggling readers don't. So that's where we started. We've since gotten a few other products. And we just started reevaluating, UFly is one of them, right? It's not technically an intervention product, but it is a now foundational skills product that we can use, especially with our younger students. And so we're starting now to collect data of what is the impact of that across grade levels. Are we seeing that's more beneficial for this population over this population, or these grade levels versus these grade levels? On the Spanish side, it's, Aprendiendo Leyendo, which was the only Spanish curriculum that was evaluated by the Reading League. It's meant for tier 1, just like UFly, but they said that, we could use it for interventions, and we're seeing a lot of success with that as well.
Excellent. Well, let's talk. Oftentimes we go to this. Well, no, before we do that, let's maybe walk through staying on the intervention thread. When you find in your upper elementary and in your middle school and junior high students, when you find, significant foundational skills gaps that require, some intervention and direct instruction related to that, what you find in a classroom of a teacher that's a 7th or 8th grade teacher that is apprehensive or nervous or frankly untrained in the art of foundational skills. What do you guys do in that setting? How do you think about that? How do you support those teachers?
Well, one thing, and I probably should have addressed this in the previous question, was, we really had to have several honest conversations of, what students should be in what interventions. And, given our population of language learners, I think at first when we were sorting students and looking at kids, we had students who could read Spanish just fine, but really struggled with English. And so therefore we're being put into reading interventions, which takes us right back to those initial concerns that we talked about of science of reading with multilingual learners. And so we've had to provide a lot of discussion or professional developments, training, whatever you want to call that one, in terms of, is this a reading issue or is this a language issue? Because we don't want to misidentify students. And so when we get to, especially students in those intermediate grades and beyond who seem to lack foundational skills, is it a true lack of foundational skills, or is it that when they started in our dual language program, we didn't explicitly teach English foundational skills, and therefore that knowledge just never transferred? And so what's the need? Is it that they can't read, or they struggle to read in general, or is it that they can read, they just struggle to read English? And so that's been a conversation that is still going on of, which kids really need a language-based, I won't say intervention, language-based instruction, versus which kids are really struggling. Outside of that, I was fortunate enough to have our upper administration, our superintendent's council, really buy in and support everything we were doing. And so everybody's participated in the literacy training, because as much as people don't want to hear it, everybody's a reading teacher because everybody has reading happen in their classrooms.
Right.
So we point out just, I wouldn't expect my seventh grade language arts teacher to teach phonics. She's never been trained in it. She's got 86 minutes. She's got a tier 1 curriculum that she's got to get through herself. So we did provide instructional strategies of, most people talk about pre-reading text or previewing vocabulary. So in addition to previewing vocabulary, let's actually provide some instruction on how we would break apart these words, right? And so at least there's some exposure of how are we chunking words, why are we chunking words in certain ways, that doesn't take a lot of time. We can pull out 3 to 5 words, talk about those in the first 2 to 3 minutes of class, and then we're into the text. And when you think about the cumulative impact of that, I'm doing that in English, I'm doing, or in language arts, I'm doing that in science, I'm doing that in social studies, I'm doing that in math. All of a sudden, there's a lot of words.
To identify themes and commonalities, and I'm starting to piece together the puzzle.
Exactly, where I actually have the knowledge now to start leading to some statistical learning. But then we definitely did have to provide training for our interventionists, because if you're in 6th grade and you need foundational skills, you're behind the 8 ball there. And so we need further conversations about this and further PD, but it's got to be accelerated learning, and what's going to give you the most accelerated foundational skill learning in the time that you have with kids. Because at our elementary schools, they have anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how quickly kids get to where they're supposed to be. At middle school or junior high, we're at 43 minutes is the full period. So really that's 38 minutes. So how can we accelerate the learning in that period of time?
Got it. Okay. Well, that leads me to maybe an interesting question that we didn't explicitly discuss, but as you think about your role in, maybe I'll bifurcate it this way. You have pedagogical concerns, right? How do things actually get taught to these kids? And then you have tactical, logistical concerns. Even if we could teach it the right way, we don't actually have the space or the time or the right desks or the right setup. How do you balance your time across those 2 different lenses, knowing that you really need both to pull off, the improvement that you're looking for?
So I'll try to answer that, and then let me know if I didn't actually answer your question. So with the pedagogical knowledge, we've been fortunate enough, we can pull interventionists during the day. Okay. And so we don't need subs for them. It's just a matter of missing groups. And so we've been fortunate enough to have that support of, yes, you can pull during the day. Just try not to always pull during the morning or always pull during the afternoon, so they're not always missing the same groups. And we've done that quite a bit. And then in terms of scheduling wise, beyond 3rd grade, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade all have what's called in our district targeted time, where it's not necessarily
win back time.
It's win what I need, whatever. So those would be times that they would be pulled, because one thing that we definitely do support is a knowledge building curriculum within the language arts period. But if we have a knowledge building curriculum and we're serious about knowledge, then we have science and social studies every day too. Right. And I know a lot of school districts, it's, well, if you need reading intervention, you're going to miss social studies or you're going to miss science. So we have to create a space of kids aren't missing those topics, because that knowledge that they're gaining there is going to impact comprehension later down the road. Right. So training wise, pulling during the day was the route that we took. Scheduling wise, we had to create a time in our day where they weren't missing tier 1 instruction, so that we could actually provide your tier 1 instruction you're not missing, and then also you have this additional dose as well.
Got it. Okay. Well, we won't spend a lot of time on a technology thread that we could. We certainly have had fun discussions about that, but for the sake of time, maybe walk through what you would see as the top 1 or 2 challenges related to technology in districts today, and and that could be from the implementation side, it's a pain in the butt because half the devices don't work all the time, or it could be more pedagogical in nature, that limited number of programs that kind of meet the standard of interest. Like, where would you sort of impart knowledge on the audience of technology state and the challenges that you experience with it?
Um, I'd say, I guess the number one challenge is time. When
Okay.
are people actually going to implement it? We had some pricey contracts with some companies to have EdTech K-8 just specifically for literacy, but then we also have things for math.
Sure.
Then we have a separate STEM time. So if
How do you
we're
get them all in?
right, yeah, when are we actually making it worth it? When are we? I know fidelity's kind of been like a dirty word ever since, like, people like implement this with fidelity, and so I know it's just a word change there, but like implement with integrity, right? And so how do we implement that with integrity or use it with integrity when it's really just pockets of time that you have? So that would be one. And then just number two, I talked about the unlearning that teachers need to do in order to have really solid research-based or evidence-based literacy instruction versus what some popular ed tech programs state that they can sell you, but really that's not based in research whatsoever. So it reinforces the things that teachers are trying to unlearn, which from a district standpoint is really challenging when we say, like, teach in this, use your tier one curriculum in this way, but then we also want you to use this product that teaches it a totally different way or approaches it a totally different way. There's that either like, well, our literacy director doesn't know what he's doing because he's also telling us to do, conflicting messages. I don't know. So that's a struggle when there's the mismatch.
Yeah. Okay. No, I can see that, and I oftentimes will use this platform or space to call on my counterparts across the country that we need to do better on making sure that we're actually solving the problems that districts are facing. And so I love hearing that, and it's a good way to be reminded of the things that we actually have to try and help solve. All right. Well, we've gone a long time here talking about a number of things. I've loved learning about some of the things that you've been approaching and how you've been doing it. I think the success that you're seeing is fantastic. That level of growth in a shorter period of time. Understand there's work to be done, but there is a lot to be commended by that level of growth. Maybe I'll have us end with just a final question. Just pull out your crystal ball. Give me some magical thoughts as we think about the future. What do you think? What do you think some of this looks like as you think about the technological challenges that you're sitting in front of and are kind of weighing on you today? Does it get better in 5 to 10 years? And if so, how? Or do we have to kind of push it aside and rethink things because it won't get better on the current path that it's on?
Personally, I don't know if this is actually going to happen or not. Personally, I would hope that we push it aside for a minute until we can really do a better job bolstering our teacher prep programs and the PD that is offered by external, I don't care if that's publishing houses or whatever.
Sure.
Like our teachers need to be better equipped with the knowledge of how students come to be readers and writers. And I think as long as we're continuously asking them to use all these ed tech platforms, and it's a constant interview question of how does technology enhance education, right? Like any job you apply for, you have to answer that question. I'm like, well, let's just see, how do you actually teach a kid in the first place? Forget using a computer. What are the practices that you need to use in order to teach a student? And so I would love to see that kind of be our focus. I know in education we hear, I hate the word pendulum. The pendulum swinging back this way. Well, it's not really a pendulum. I mean, orthographic mapping was one of the first things that we started talking about in Cicero, and that, linearity started talking about that in the 70s, I want to say. So, like, that's not a pendulum. Like, it's been pretty consistent there.
Consistent.
It seems like we have, Zach Rochelle had a really good tweet one time that said our post, there's evidence-based practices and there's a departure from it. And I think
There's
now,
a pendulum, right?
That's not, yeah. And right now we need to make sure that it's not a pendulum. There are evidence-based practices, and we need to make sure everybody knows what those things are. And then once we have an idea of what those things are, we can be a little bit more intentional or purposeful in our use of EdTech.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. That's a great push and a great vision for the future. Thank you so much for taking time to join me on the show today, and I look forward to hopefully doing it again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found today's conversation insightful, be sure to subscribe to Literacy Mindset. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates, resources, and to join the conversation. Have a topic you'd like us to explore? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.